The call came at 2:17 a.m. I still remember the exact time because that single phone call changed everything I thought I knew about my family. At first, I ignored it. I was thousands of miles away, working overseas in Dubai, exhausted after a 14-hour shift. My phone kept vibrating on the nightstand beside my bed. Unknown number. Again and again. By the fourth call, I finally answered. Hello? For a moment, nobody spoke. Then a man's voice came through. Is this Daniel Carter? My stomach tightened. Yes. This is attorney Michael Reynolds from Ohio. I apologize for calling at such a late hour, but I need to discuss a property registered under your name. A property? My house. The small 2-story home I'd spent nearly 10 years paying for. The house I bought before leaving America. The house I plan to return to someday. What about it? I asked. There was a pause. Then he said words that made my blood run cold. Mr. Carter, your house was sold 3 weeks ago. I sat upright. What? According to county records, ownership has been transferred to another party. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it sounded impossible. There must be some mistake. I wish there was. I stared at the darkness in my apartment. No, I whispered. That's impossible. The lawyer's voice softened. The documents appear legitimate. Appear. That word hit me harder than anything. Appear legitimate. My heart began pounding. Because there was only one way anyone could have sold my house. Someone had pretended to be me. And suddenly, I knew exactly who might be involved. My parents. The thought felt ridiculous. Until it didn't. Because if there was one thing my parents had always believed, it was that whatever belonged to me somehow belonged to the entire family, especially my younger brother Tyler. Growing up, Tyler never heard the word no. If he wanted my toys, he got them. If he wanted my bike, I had to share. If he broke something of mine, I was told not to overreact. My parents called it being supportive. I called it favoritism. By the time we became adults, nothing had changed. Tyler drifted from job to job, one failed business after another, one excuse after another. And every single time my parents rescued him. When he crashed his truck, they paid for another one. When he maxed out his credit cards, they cleared the debt. When he lost his apartment, they let him move back home. Meanwhile, I worked, saved, sacrificed, built my life one paycheck at a time. Eventually, I bought my own house. It wasn't huge, it wasn't fancy, but it was mine. The first thing in my life nobody could take away, or so I thought. The lawyer emailed me copies of the documents. I opened them immediately. My hands shook as I looked through page after page. Then I saw it. My signature. Or at least a version of it. A bad version. A forged version. Someone had copied my name. Someone had submitted paperwork pretending to be me. And somehow, the sale went through. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I called my mother. She answered immediately. Daniel, honey. Her cheerful voice instantly irritated me. Mom. How are you? We haven't talked in weeks. I skipped the small talk. Why was my house sold? Silence. Complete silence. Then came a nervous laugh. What are you talking about? Don't do that. More silence. I heard her breathing. Then she said something that made my jaw tighten. Maybe you should talk to your father. That was all I needed. Because innocent people don't redirect questions. Guilty people do. I hung up and called Dad. He answered after 2 rings. Daniel. Who sold my house? A long pause followed. Then he sighed. Not shocked, not confused, just tired. Like a man caught doing something he hoped wouldn't be discovered. It's complicated. Those 3 words confirmed everything. No, I snapped. It's not complicated. Son, Did you sell my house? His voice hardened. We were trying to help the family. The family. There it was. The excuse they always used. The phrase that somehow meant Tyler's problems mattered more than everyone else's rights. I felt anger building in my chest. What does that have to do with my house? Dad exhaled heavily. Tyler needed money. Of course he did. The answer didn't surprise me. It never could. What happened this time? His silence told me everything. Another failure, another disaster, another rescue mission. Finally, he admitted it. His business collapsed. I laughed bitterly. Which one? Dad ignored the comment. He owed people money. So you stole from me? We didn't steal. The audacity nearly made me throw my phone across the room. You sold my house. We intended to pay you back. That sentence made my blood boil. Intended. As if intention erased betrayal. As if planning to repay someone somehow justified robbing them first. You forged legal documents. We had permission. No, you didn't. Mom suddenly joined the call. Her voice trembled. We thought you'd understand. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You committed fraud. Don't use that word. What word should I use? Nobody answered. Because there wasn't another word. Fraud was exactly what it was. For the next 20 minutes they tried explaining, excusing, justifying. Every sentence sounded worse than the one before. Apparently Tyler convinced them that selling my property was the only way to avoid financial disaster. Apparently they believed he would repay everything quickly. Apparently they thought I wouldn't mind. Wouldn't mind. The house I'd spent 10 years earning. The house carrying my name. The house representing every sacrifice I'd made. Sold without my knowledge. And they thought I wouldn't mind. Finally, I asked the question that mattered most. Where is Tyler now? Another silence. Then Mom answered. Living there. I froze. What? The buyers agreed to rent it back temporarily. My stomach dropped. Tyler wasn't just responsible for losing my house. He was living inside it, walking through my rooms, sleeping under my roof, using everything I'd built, as if it belonged to him. The anger became something colder, something sharper, something dangerous. I ended the call without another word. Then I booked the first flight home. 22 hours later, I stood outside my house, or what used to be my house. The familiar blue siding, the front porch I built myself, the maple tree I planted 5 years earlier. Everything looked the same, yet somehow completely different, because ownership changes everything. A moving truck sat in the driveway. Boxes lined the front yard. People carried furniture inside. The new owners. My chest tightened. I approached slowly. A woman noticed me. Can I help you? I forced a smile. My name is Daniel Carter. Her face changed instantly. Recognition, confusion, concern. You should probably come inside. That sentence told me one thing. There was much more to this story than I knew, and what I was about to discover would expose a betrayal far bigger than the sale itself. Because hidden inside that house was a secret my parents never expected me to uncover. A secret that would eventually bring a sheriff to the front door and leave my entire family speechless. The woman led me into the living room, and for a moment I forgot why I was there. Everything looked almost exactly the way I had left it before moving overseas. The hardwood floors I installed with my own hands were still shining beneath the afternoon sunlight. The fireplace I spent weeks rebuilding still stood in the corner. Even the small scratch on the wall near the staircase, the one caused by a couch during moving day years ago, was still there. It felt like walking through a memory that no longer belonged to me. The woman introduced herself as Sarah Mitchell, and her husband David joined us moments later. Both looked uncomfortable, as though they had been waiting for this conversation. Sarah explained that they had purchased the property through what they believed was a completely legal transaction. Every document appeared valid. Every signature matched the identification they were shown. Every step had been approved by professionals. Yet the moment she learned I was the real owner, she realized something wasn't right. Then David brought out a folder containing copies of the paperwork from the sale. As I flipped through the pages, something immediately caught my attention. Along with the forged signatures were several supporting documents, including identification records and authorization forms. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make the sale look legitimate. This wasn't a simple mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a carefully planned operation. Whoever organized it had spent weeks preparing. My parents hadn't simply made a terrible decision. They had participated in something much larger, something deliberate, something criminal. As we continued talking, Sarah revealed another detail that made my stomach twist. The person handling most of the communication during the sale wasn't my father. It wasn't my mother. It was Tyler. According to emails and recorded conversations, Tyler had presented himself as my authorized representative. He claimed I was busy overseas and unable to handle the process personally. He answered questions, signed forms, coordinated meetings. He acted as if the property belonged to him. The realization hit me like a punch. Tyler hadn't merely benefited from the fraud. He had orchestrated it. Every excuse my parents gave me suddenly fell apart. They weren't helping Tyler solve a problem. Tyler had manipulated them into helping him steal from me. The more documents I reviewed, the clearer the picture became. The business Tyler claimed had collapsed wasn't just struggling. It had been drowning in debt for nearly 2 years. Suppliers were demanding payment. Investors wanted answers. Lawsuits were beginning to appear. Collection agencies were calling constantly. He wasn't facing a temporary setback. He was facing total financial ruin. And instead of accepting responsibility, he looked at my house and saw an escape route. That evening, I left Sarah and David's house with copies of every document they possessed. I checked into a nearby hotel and spent the entire night reviewing the evidence. Page after page revealed new lies. Tyler had borrowed money from friends, borrowed money from relatives, borrowed money from private lenders. Each loan came with promises of massive returns and guaranteed success. Each promise ended exactly the same way: failure. What shocked me most wasn't the amount of money he lost. It was how long he managed to hide it. My parents weren't innocent victims. Deep down, they knew he was in trouble. Maybe not every detail, but enough to understand the danger. Yet they kept protecting him, covering for him, excusing him. Every time life presented consequences, they stepped in and absorbed the impact. Until eventually there was nothing left to sacrifice except something that belonged to someone else. Me. As dawn approached, I stared out the hotel window and thought about every holiday dinner, every birthday gathering, every family conversation where I had ignored warning signs because I wanted to believe blood meant loyalty. Looking back, the pattern was obvious. Tyler made mistakes. Everyone else paid the price. The next morning, I met with Attorney Reynolds in person. He carefully reviewed the documents and listened as I explained everything. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. His expression told me he had reached a conclusion long before I did. "Daniel," he said quietly, "this case is much bigger than a property dispute." I already knew that. "How big?" I asked. He opened a file and pointed towards several highlighted sections. "If these signatures are fraudulent, we're potentially looking at identity fraud, document forgery, financial misrepresentation, and several other serious violations." Hearing those words should have made me feel better. Instead, I felt exhausted. Because legal action meant one thing: my family was about to become my opponent. Attorney Reynolds then showed me something unexpected. During his investigation, he discovered another property transaction connected to Tyler, a warehouse building purchased through one of his failed companies. The records surrounding that purchase were filled with irregularities, missing disclosures, conflicting financial statements, suspicious transfers. It looked like Tyler's problems extended far beyond my house. For years, he had been building a tower of lies. Now that tower was beginning to collapse. As the days passed, more information surfaced. Former business partners began returning calls. Investors shared records. Even a few former employees reached out. The stories were remarkably similar. Tyler promised opportunities. Tyler guaranteed success. Tyler blamed others when things failed. One investor told me he lost nearly his entire retirement fund trusting my brother. Another described months of unanswered messages and broken promises. Listening to them, I realized something painful. My parents weren't the only people Tyler had manipulated. He left a trail of damaged relationships stretching across years. Yet somehow everyone kept giving him another chance. Maybe because he was charming. Maybe because he always sounded sincere. Or maybe because people wanted to believe someone they cared about could change. I understood that feeling better than anyone. For most of my life, I had defended him too. I had convinced myself he simply needed time to mature, time to learn, time to become responsible. But some people don't learn from consequences because someone always removes the consequences before they arrive. One afternoon, while reviewing financial records with my attorney, we discovered something that changed everything. A large portion of the money from my house sale had already disappeared. It wasn't sitting in a bank account waiting to be returned. It wasn't invested in a new business. It wasn't being used to repay debts. Tyler had spent much of it. Luxury purchases, expensive trips, high-end electronics, restaurant bills, entertainment expenses. The realization made me physically sick. While I was working overseas, saving every dollar and planning for the future, my brother was spending the value of my home like a vacation fund. The betrayal felt deeper than theft. It felt personal. Every sacrifice I made had become fuel for his lifestyle. Every hour I worked had helped finance his irresponsibility. At that moment, something changed inside me. The anger remained, but it became focused, controlled, strategic. I no longer wanted revenge driven by emotion. I wanted the truth exposed completely. That night, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice sounded shaky. "Daniel, please stop talking to lawyers." I closed my eyes and took a slow breath. "Why?" I asked. She hesitated. Then came the answer I expected. "Because families shouldn't do this to each other." The irony nearly made me laugh. Families shouldn't do this to each other. Yet nobody said that when they sold my house. Nobody said that when they forged my name. Nobody said that when they transferred ownership without my knowledge. Somehow, family loyalty only mattered when I started defending myself. I listened quietly as she begged me to reconsider. She talked about forgiveness, understanding, compassion. Every word sounded familiar because I had heard them my entire life whenever Tyler created another disaster. Finally, I asked a simple question. If I had stolen Tyler's house, would you be asking him to forgive me? The silence on the other end lasted nearly 10 seconds. That silence gave me my answer. When the call ended, I looked at the growing stack of evidence covering my hotel desk: financial records, emails, signatures, property transfers, witness statements. Every piece told part of the same story. For years, my family had built a system where Tyler never faced consequences. But systems eventually fail when reality becomes impossible to ignore. The truth was no longer hidden. It was documented, organized, waiting. And soon the people responsible would learn something they should have learned long ago. Actions have consequences, no matter how much someone tries to escape them, no matter how many excuses others create. The process was already moving forward. Attorneys were preparing filings. Investigators were reviewing records. Questions were being asked that nobody could avoid. And somewhere across town, Tyler still believed he could talk his way out of everything. He had no idea what was coming. But very soon, a knock on a certain front door would begin a chain of events that would change all our lives forever. The weeks that followed became a blur of meetings, legal documents, phone calls, and discoveries that seemed more shocking than the last. Every morning, I woke up hoping there couldn't possibly be anything worse left to uncover. Every evening, I went to bed realizing I had underestimated just how far Tyler was willing to go to protect himself. What started as a stolen house was becoming something much larger. Attorney Reynolds had assembled a team to examine every financial record connected to Tyler's businesses, and the deeper they looked, the darker the picture became. Accounts appeared and disappeared. Money moved between companies that existed only on paper. Loans were taken out using information that didn't always match reality. At first, each discovery seemed unrelated, but slowly the pieces began fitting together. It was like watching a puzzle form one painful piece at a time. Tyler hadn't simply made bad business decisions. He had spent years creating illusions. Whenever one company failed, he started another. Whenever creditors demanded payment, he borrowed from someone new. Whenever questions became difficult, he shifted attention elsewhere. The entire system depended on one thing: people continuing to believe him. The moment that belief disappeared, everything would collapse. One afternoon, while reviewing newly obtained bank records, Attorney Reynolds called me into his office. The serious expression on his face immediately told me something important had happened. He slid several documents across the desk and pointed toward a series of transactions. At first, the numbers meant nothing to me. Then I noticed the pattern. Large sums of money had been transferred into accounts that weren't listed under Tyler's primary businesses. Hidden accounts. Accounts nobody had mentioned before. Accounts that somehow received funds from multiple failed ventures. My attorney explained that investigators had recently discovered several financial connections leading to these accounts. The transactions stretched back years. Some occurred only days before my house was sold. Others happened immediately afterward. As I followed the paper trail, a terrible realization emerged. Tyler wasn't desperately trying to save himself. He had been quietly protecting money while convincing everyone else he was broke. The debts were real, the failures were real, but so were the hidden funds. While family members worried about him and creditors demanded answers, Tyler had secretly moved money beyond their reach. The deception wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, calculated, planned. As disturbing as that discovery was, something even bigger arrived a few days later. A former employee named Kevin contacted our office requesting a private meeting. According to Kevin, he had worked for Tyler's largest company during its final months and possessed information he no longer felt comfortable keeping secret. We met in a small conference room. Kevin looked nervous. He kept glancing toward the door as if he expected someone to walk in unexpectedly. After several minutes of hesitation, he finally began talking. What he revealed changed everything. According to Kevin, Tyler knew his business was collapsing long before he admitted it publicly. Instead of warning investors, employees, and lenders, he continued accepting money. He continued making promises. He continued presenting an image of success. Internally, however, he was preparing for failure. Kevin described meetings where Tyler openly discussed transferring assets, hiding funds, and protecting personal property before creditors could react. At first, I struggled to believe what I was hearing. Then Kevin handed over copies of emails, copies of internal memos, copies of messages Tyler never expected anyone else to see. Suddenly, the impossible became undeniable. My brother hadn't been trying to save his company. He had been planning its collapse. The evidence continued growing. Every new document revealed another layer of deception. Investors discovered promises that contradicted reality. Business partners found agreements they had never been told about. Creditors uncovered transfers that appeared designed to shield assets from collection efforts. The deeper investigators dug, the more names appeared. Financial analysts started mapping relationships between accounts, companies, and transactions. What emerged resembled a spider web stretching across years of activity. Somewhere near the center of that web sat Tyler. Yet perhaps the most painful part wasn't the fraud itself. It was realizing how many opportunities he had to stop. At any point, he could have admitted failure. At any point, he could have accepted responsibility. At any point, he could have chosen honesty. Instead, he doubled down, then doubled down again. Every lie required another lie. Every deception required another deception. until eventually he crossed a line he could never uncross. Selling my house wasn't the beginning of the story. It was merely the moment the story became impossible to hide. Meanwhile, my parents continued calling almost daily. Their tone had changed dramatically. The confidence they displayed during our first conversations was gone. In its place was fear, real fear. They knew investigations were advancing. They knew lawyers were gathering evidence. Most importantly, they knew the situation had moved beyond family arguments. One evening, my father asked to meet in person. Against my attorney's advice, I agreed. We sat across from each other in a quiet restaurant. He looked older than I remembered, more tired, more defeated. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, he leaned forward and lowered his voice. "You have to stop this." I stared at him. "Stop what?" His answer came immediately. "The investigation." The request was so unreasonable I almost laughed. He still didn't understand. He still believed this was a disagreement that could be fixed through family pressure. But investigations don't disappear because someone feels uncomfortable. Facts don't vanish because people regret being caught. I explained that the process was already moving forward. His shoulders slumped. Then he quietly admitted something that shocked me. He knew the signatures weren't legitimate. He knew before the house was sold. The confession hung between us like a storm cloud. Hearing him finally say it out loud felt strangely relieving and heartbreaking at the same time. Days later, another breakthrough arrived. Investigators obtained access to additional financial records connected to one of Tyler's hidden accounts. What they found sent shockwaves through everyone involved. A portion of the money from my house sale had been transferred only hours after closing. Not to creditors, not to business expenses, not to emergency obligations. The money had been moved into a personal account controlled exclusively by Tyler. Then large portions were withdrawn in cash. Nobody could explain where the cash went. Nobody could document how it was used. The timing raised immediate questions. Investigators became increasingly interested. Attorneys became increasingly confident. And Tyler became increasingly desperate. Friends reported receiving strange phone calls from him. Former associates described urgent requests for favors. Some even claimed he was discussing plans to leave the state. Whether those rumors were true remained unclear, but one thing was obvious. For the first time in years, Tyler seemed genuinely worried. The pressure intensified quickly. Investigators interviewed witnesses. Financial experts prepared reports. Attorneys coordinated with local authorities. Every step brought the case closer to a formal conclusion. Then one morning, Attorney Reynolds called with news that left me speechless. Authorities had determined there was sufficient evidence to pursue multiple actions connected to the property transfer and financial activities under review. The exact details remained confidential, but the message was clear. The situation had reached a point where law enforcement would become directly involved. After ending the call, I sat alone for nearly an hour processing everything. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel happy. Mostly I felt sad. This wasn't how families were supposed to end up. Yet every path leading here had been created by choices. Not accidents, not misunderstandings. Choices. Years of choices. And now the consequences were arriving. 3 days later, I drove past my old house. The same house that started everything. The front lawn looked quiet. The neighborhood appeared peaceful. Nothing suggested the storm building beneath the surface. Yet I knew things were about to change. Inside legal offices, reports were being finalized. Inside government buildings, paperwork was moving forward. Inside Tyler's world, the walls were closing in. He still didn't fully understand how much evidence existed. He still believed he could explain everything away. But some truths become too large to hide. Some lies become too heavy to carry. And very soon, someone would arrive carrying official documents that would force everyone to face reality. The moment was approaching faster than anyone realized. A sheriff was preparing to make a visit. Investigators were ready. Attorneys were ready. Witnesses were ready. The truth was ready. And when that knock finally echoed through the house, decades of excuses, favoritism, and betrayal would come crashing down in a single unforgettable moment. The knock came early on a gray Tuesday morning. It was the kind of morning that felt unusually quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I wasn't there when it happened, but later I heard the details from witnesses, legal reports, and even my parents themselves. According to everyone present, Tyler was sitting in the kitchen drinking coffee when the sound echoed through the house. At first he ignored it. Then came a second knock, louder this time, more deliberate. When he finally opened the door, he found a uniformed sheriff standing on the porch holding a folder of official documents. Behind him stood another officer and a court representative. Tyler immediately understood that this wasn't a casual visit. This wasn't a neighbor stopping by. This wasn't another creditor calling with empty threats. This was reality arriving at his front door. For years, he had managed to escape consequences through charm, excuses, and promises. But on that morning, none of those things mattered. The sheriff calmly explained why he was there. Legal actions connected to the property transfer and financial investigation were officially moving forward. Documents were served, notices were delivered, deadlines were established. Witnesses later said Tyler's face turned pale as the situation became impossible to deny. The game he had been playing for years was finally ending. News spread through the family almost immediately. My mother called me less than an hour later. She was crying before I even answered. Between sobs, she tried explaining what happened, as though I hadn't spent months watching the process unfold. For the first time since this nightmare began, she sounded genuinely broken. Not angry, not defensive, broken. She kept repeating the same sentence. I never thought it would go this far. The words stayed with me long after the call ended, because the truth was simple. It had gone this far the moment they decided my rights didn't matter. It had gone this far the moment they forged signatures. It had gone this far the moment they convinced themselves that helping Tyler justified hurting someone else. The sheriff's visit wasn't the cause of their problems, it was the result. Years of bad decisions had finally reached their destination. Later that afternoon, my father called as well. Unlike my mother, he didn't cry. Instead, he sounded exhausted, defeated, like a man who had spent years defending a position he no longer believed in. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then he quietly said something I never expected to hear. You were right. 4 simple words, yet they carried decades of meaning. As legal proceedings accelerated, Tyler made one final attempt to save himself. He contacted relatives, former friends, business associates, and anyone else willing to listen. Suddenly, he wasn't the confident businessman promising success. He was a desperate man searching for rescue. He claimed people misunderstood him. He claimed investigators exaggerated facts. He claimed lawyers twisted the truth. The problem was that evidence doesn't care about explanations. Documents don't change because someone dislikes them. Records remain records. Financial transfers remain financial transfers. Signatures remain signatures. One by one, people stopped believing him. Some had already lost money because of his decisions. Others had spent years defending behavior that became increasingly impossible to justify. The support system he relied upon for so long began disappearing. Not because people hated him, because they finally saw reality, and reality was impossible to ignore. Every hidden account, every transfer, every forged document, every broken promise. Together they painted a picture no amount of storytelling could erase. Several weeks later, the courtroom proceedings began. Walking into that building felt surreal. Part of me still couldn't believe we had reached this point. Families argue, families disagree, but few imagine they will someday sit across from each other in court. Yet there we were. My attorney organized stacks of evidence on our table. Across the room, Tyler sat beside his legal team. For the first time in months, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. Gone was the confidence that had carried him through countless crises. Gone was the certainty that someone would rescue him. Courtrooms operate differently than family gatherings. Facts matter. Documentation matters. Evidence matters. During the proceedings, witnesses testified about transactions, communications, and financial activities connected to the investigation. Experts explained records. Professionals described procedures. Every testimony added another layer of clarity. Piece by piece, the full story emerged. What shocked many observers wasn't a single dramatic revelation. It was the overwhelming consistency of the evidence. Everything pointed in the same direction. Every path led back to the same choices. The most emotional moment arrived when my father was called to testify. Watching him walk toward the witness stand was one of the hardest experiences of my life. This was the man who taught me how to ride a bicycle, the man who attended my school events, the man whose approval I spent years chasing. Yet now he stood under oath facing questions about decisions that helped create this disaster. His voice trembled as he answered. At times he looked toward Tyler. At times he looked toward the floor. Finally, he admitted what everyone already suspected. He knew the transaction wasn't legitimate. He allowed himself to believe it was temporary. He convinced himself everything would eventually work out. The courtroom became silent. Not because the confession was surprising, because it was tragic. It revealed how loyalty, when pushed too far, can become something dangerous. Protecting someone from every consequence doesn't save them. Sometimes it destroys them. My father's testimony wasn't just about legal responsibility. It was about decades of enabling behavior finally exposed under bright lights. As proceedings continued, Tyler made one last attempt to defend himself. He spoke about pressure, stress, financial hardship, fear. Some of what he said was probably true. Running failing businesses creates enormous pressure. Facing debt creates fear. But hardship explains decisions. It doesn't excuse them. Everyone experiences challenges. Not everyone responds by forging documents and taking property that belongs to someone else. The distinction mattered, and the court recognized it. By the time final arguments concluded, the outcome felt increasingly clear. Weeks of testimony, evidence, and investigation had created a picture that could not be ignored. The facts spoke louder than emotions, louder than excuses, louder than promises. When the decision finally arrived, the room remained completely silent. The judgment addressed property ownership, financial responsibility, and multiple actions connected to the investigation. Most importantly, it established accountability. Real accountability. The kind that had been missing from Tyler's life for years. Walking outside afterward felt strange. The legal battle that consumed so much of my life was finally ending. Reporters weren't waiting. Crowds weren't cheering. There was no dramatic movie-style celebration. Just sunlight, fresh air, and a sense of closure I hadn't felt in a very long time. In the months that followed, consequences continued unfolding. Financial obligations had to be addressed. Assets had to be reviewed. Relationships had to confront uncomfortable truths. My parents faced difficult realities about their role in everything that happened. Tyler faced realities he had spent years avoiding, and I faced a reality of my own. Revenge hadn't healed me. Justice had. There is an important difference. Revenge focuses on making others suffer. Justice focuses on making truth visible. Throughout this journey, I thought I wanted revenge. What I actually wanted was acknowledgement, accountability, recognition that what happened was wrong. Once that finally arrived, the anger gradually began fading. Nearly a year later, I stood once again in front of the house that started everything. The property had gone through legal processes, and ownership questions had finally been resolved. As I looked at the familiar porch and maple tree, memories flooded back. Not just painful memories, good ones too. Childhood dreams, future plans, moments of hope. For a long time, I believed my family had stolen those things from me. Standing there, I realized something important. They never could. They could take property. They could take money. They could even damage trust. But they couldn't take character. They couldn't take integrity. They couldn't take the values that allowed me to rebuild when everything seemed lost. In the end, that became the greatest lesson of all. Life eventually reveals who people truly are. Some reveal honesty, some reveal courage, some reveal selfishness, some reveal integrity. When that moment comes, titles don't matter. Excuses don't matter. Only choices matter. If there's one lesson hidden inside this story, it's this. Protecting someone from consequences may feel like love, but often it becomes the very thing that harms them most. Accountability isn't cruelty, it's responsibility. And responsibility is how people grow. My parents spent years believing they were helping Tyler. In reality, they were teaching him that rules applied to everyone except him. Eventually, reality corrected that lesson. It corrected it painfully, but it corrected it nonetheless. As for me, I learned something equally valuable. Betrayal can break your heart, but it doesn't have to break your future. Sometimes the people closest to you will disappoint you. Sometimes trust will be shattered. Sometimes the road to justice will feel impossibly long. But truth has a remarkable way of surviving. It waits patiently. It gathers strength. And sooner or later, it finds the light. When it does, no lie is strong enough to stop it, and no amount of betrayal can erase it. The end.